negative pressure there. But I guess the question is that a trend or is it just, a blip?
Right.
So what I find really fascinating, though, with this one is that despite that recent dip, the data is actually suggesting that there's a predicted rise of over 10% over the next 3 months. Now, what's really interesting is the probability range.
Yeah.
It's quite wide. So it goes from a lower end of 366 all the way up to 1803.
Wow, that's quite a range.
It is.
Yeah.
And that shows a lot of uncertainty. But, it is nonetheless suggesting a potentially much more positive medium-term outlook.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Despite what we're seeing in the short term.
And I think it's really key to understand that even though we have these predictions, we can't just take them at face value.
Absolutely not.
We have to look at the data. We have to understand why those predictions are being made. And, in this particular case, it looks like even though there's this potential for a rise in the next 3 months, the short-term indicators are actually pointing towards a sell.
A sell recommendation.
Yeah, which is a little bit counterintuitive when you think about it, right?
Yeah, it is interesting because on the one hand, you've got this potentially positive medium-term outlook. But then on the other hand, the short term is saying sell.
Yeah.
And that often happens in the market because you've got different, analytical horizons and different methodologies that can lead to seemingly contradictory signals. So it's really important, I think, for anyone looking at this to recognize that divergence, that, the immediate signals are suggesting caution.
Mm-hmm.
But the medium-term outlook is, suggesting that there might be a little bit of hope there.
Yeah, and this really speaks to what we always say about the market is that nothing is certain and you have to be really careful and, do your research.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And particularly in a sector like biotech, where, things can change very quickly.
Right.
Sentiment can change very quickly.
Yeah.
News flow can change very quickly. And I think the key takeaway here is that, those short-term indicators are suggesting caution. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the longer-term outlook is completely off the table.
Right. And, when I was looking at this data, I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what has actually been happening with this company?
Yeah.
And it looks like the last big piece of news actually came out on March 19th.
Okay.
And that was for their fourth quarter 2024 earnings call. And so I was like, okay, well, that's pretty recent. That's just, a couple of weeks ago. So what came out of that? And it looks like the key takeaway was that they got an infusion of about $8.8 million.
Oh, wow.
From what are called warrant exercises.
Okay.
And so that's when, holders of these warrants, they have the option to buy shares, and they did. And so that kind of infused the company with some cash.
Right.
And what the company has said is that this essentially